I refused to pay for my daughter-in-law's $50,000 cruise. She slapped me and shouted, "Then find somewhere else to live." My son nodded. "I'll squeeze every cent out of you." I walked out with no destination. 2 days later, I found myself at the harbor, staring at cruise ships that represented everything I could never afford. That's when I saw him, a face I hadn't seen in 40 years. He recognized me immediately. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." The words left my mouth quietly, but they might as well have been a bomb exploding in my son Dorian's living room. "I refuse to pay $50,000 for your cruise. Lennox." I watched as my daughter-in-law's face twisted into something ugly. Her perfectly manicured fingers gripped the glossy cruise brochure so tightly it crumpled between her French-tipped nails. "Excuse me." Lennox's voice was ice cold. That tone she used when she wanted to make someone feel small. I'd heard it countless times over the past 5 years since she married my son. I straightened my shoulders, trying to find strength I wasn't sure I still possessed. At 62, I had spent decades being the reliable one, the steady one, the one who sacrificed. But something in me had finally snapped. "You heard me. I won't pay for your anniversary cruise." The silence that followed was deafening. Dorian sat frozen on the couch between us, his eyes darting back and forth like he was watching a tennis match. But I knew which side he'd choose. He always chose Lennox. "Marin," Lennox said, standing up slowly, her 5'9" frame towering over me as I remained seated. "I think you misunderstood. This isn't a request." My heart started pounding, but I kept my voice steady. "I understood perfectly, and the answer is no." That's when it happened. The sound of her palm connecting with my cheek echoed through the room like a gunshot. The sting was immediate, radiating across my face and down my neck. I touched my cheek, feeling the heat spreading under my skin. "Then find somewhere else to live," Lennox screamed, her composed mask finally slipping. "I'm tired of supporting a selfish old woman who can't even help her own family." I looked at Dorian, waiting for him to defend me, to tell his wife she'd crossed a line. Instead, he nodded slowly, avoiding my eyes. "Mom," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "maybe it's time you found your own place. Lennox is right. We've been carrying you financially for too long." The betrayal hit harder than the slap. Dorian was my only child, the baby I'd raised alone after his father abandoned us when he was 3. I'd worked double shifts at the hospital as a nurse, sacrificed everything to give him opportunities I never had, and this was how he repaid me. "I've been paying rent here for 2 years, I said, my voice trembling despite my efforts to stay calm. "I've helped with groceries, utilities, even that down payment on your car." Lennox laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. "Helped? You mean the measly $800 a month you contribute? Dorian makes 6 figures. Marin, your little contribution is nothing." "Then why do you need my $50,000 for a cruise?" I asked. Dorian finally looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before: resentment. "Because we deserve it. Mom, Lennox and I work hard. We've earned a luxury vacation." "With my money. Money you're just hoarding anyway," Lennox snapped. "What are you saving it for? You're 62 years old with no life, no friends, nothing. At least let your family enjoy it." The words cut deep because part of them was true. I had become isolated over the years, especially after moving in with them. Lennox had slowly but systematically distanced me from my few friends, always finding reasons why I couldn't attend gatherings or why people couldn't visit. "I'm saving it for emergencies," I said weakly. "Well, this is an emergency," Dorian said, standing up and crossing his arms. Our marriage needs this trip, Mom, and if you can't support that, then maybe you need to reevaluate what family means to you. I stared at my son, this man I barely recognized. When had he become so cold? When had he started speaking to me like I was a burden instead of his mother? I see, I whispered, gathering my purse and standing on shaky legs. I'll pack my things. Good, Lennox said, settling back onto the couch with a satisfied smirk. And don't think you can guilt trip us into changing our minds. Dorian agrees with me completely. As I walked toward the stairs to pack my belongings, I heard Dorian's voice behind me. Mom, wait for a moment. Hope fluttered in my chest. Maybe he was finally going to stand up for me. I'm going to need every penny from you. That $50,000 plus whatever else you've got saved. Consider it compensation for everything Lennox and I have provided over the years. The hope died instantly, replaced by a cold numbness that spread through my entire body. I didn't trust myself to speak, so I just continued up the stairs to the small room that had been my home for 2 years. It didn't take long to pack. When you've been made to feel like a guest in your own family, you don't accumulate much. 2 suitcases and a box of photo albums. That was the sum total of my life. As I carried my bags downstairs, I could hear Lennox on the phone in the kitchen, her voice animated and happy. Yes, Mom, she finally agreed to move out. I know, I'm so relieved. Dorian and I can finally have our house back. I paused at the bottom of the stairs, listening to her paint me as the villain in her story. According to Lennox, I had graciously decided to give them their space and had even offered to help pay for their anniversary cruise as a parting gift. Dorian was nowhere to be seen when I reached the front door, probably hiding in his office. Too much of a coward to face what he'd done. I set my bags down and took one last look around the house where I'd thought I'd found a place to belong. The irony wasn't lost on me. This house with its granite countertops and hardwood floors had been purchased with my help. When Dorian and Lennox got married, I'd given them $20,000 from my savings as a wedding gift, money I'd earned working double shifts and saving every penny for 30 years. I picked up my bags and walked out into the cool evening air. My car, a 15-year-old Honda that had seen better days, sat in the driveway like a faithful old friend. At least it was mine, paid for with my own money. As I loaded my belongings into the trunk, I realized I had nowhere to go. No family who would take me in, no close friends to call. The few people I'd once been close to had drifted away over the years or been pushed away by Lennox's subtle manipulations. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. At 62, I was homeless, essentially alone in the world with nothing but my car and whatever money I had left in my savings account. The tears came then, hot and bitter, streaming down my face as the reality of my situation hit me. My own son had chosen his wife's greed over his mother's well-being. The child I'd sacrificed everything for had thrown me away like garbage. I started the car and drove aimlessly through the suburbs, past houses filled with families who probably loved each other, past the hospital where I'd worked for 30 years before retiring, past a life that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. As night fell, I found myself in a 24-hour diner parking lot, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My left cheek was still red from Lennox's slap, and my eyes were swollen from crying. I looked exactly like what I was, a discarded old woman with nowhere to go. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the hurt and humiliation, something else was stirring. It felt foreign at first, this tiny spark of something that might have been anger. Or maybe it was just the beginning of understanding that I deserved better than this. I pulled out my phone and checked my bank balance. $87,000. Not a fortune, but more than Lennox thought I had. Money I'd saved penny by penny, working jobs that destroyed my back and aged my hands, always thinking I was building something for my family's future. Now I realized the truth. I hadn't been building anything for them. I'd been building a prison for myself, one made of guilt and obligation, and the desperate need to be loved by people who saw me as nothing more than a source of money. The question was, what was I going to do about it? I spent 3 days living in my car, moving from parking lot to parking lot, trying to figure out what to do next. The nights were the worst, curled up in the back seat, listening to every sound, jumping at every shadow. During the day, I'd drive around aimlessly, sometimes stopping at diners for coffee and a cheap meal, trying to make my money last. On the fourth morning, I woke up with my back aching and my mind made up. I couldn't live like this. I needed a plan, somewhere to go, something to do with whatever years I had left. I remembered a conversation I'd had years ago with a former colleague who'd moved to Clearwater after retirement. She'd mentioned affordable senior apartments near the harbor. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was something. I plugged Clearwater into my GPS and started driving. 6 hours later, I arrived, exhausted but determined. The harbor stretched before me, boats of all sizes bobbing gently in the water. I parked and walked along the marina, breathing in the salt air. For the first time in days, I felt a sense of possibility. I found a small coffee shop with free Wi-Fi and started searching for apartments. The prices made my heart sink. Even the smallest units were more expensive than I'd expected. My savings wouldn't last long if I had to pay these rates. As I scrolled through listings, a memory surfaced, something about a summer job I'd had when I was 22, right before I met Dorian's father. I'd worked for a maritime supply company, keeping inventory and processing orders. It had been a good job, one I'd enjoyed, and there had been someone. I searched Sullivan Maritime on my phone, wondering if the company still existed. To my surprise, it did, and it had grown into Sullivan Maritime Enterprises, a successful cruise line with a fleet of luxury ships. Their headquarters was right here in Clearwater, and the CEO was Jack Sullivan. My heart skipped a beat as I stared at his photo on the company website. Even after 40 years, I'd have recognized that face anywhere. Jack Sullivan, my first love, the man I'd thought I'd marry before life got complicated and pulled us in different directions. We'd met that summer at the Maritime Supply Company where we both worked. He was passionate about ships and the sea, determined to build his own fleet someday. I was saving for nursing school, practical and focused. We'd fallen in love anyway, spending evenings walking along the harbor, planning futures that seemed perfectly aligned. Then I'd gotten pregnant with Dorian, and Jack had been offered a position on a cargo ship, his first real step toward his dreams. We tried to make it work, but the timing was wrong. He'd gone to sea, and I'd married Dorian's father, a decision I'd regretted within a year. Now here was Jack, staring back at me from my phone screen, successful and accomplished, exactly as he'd always said he would be, while I was homeless, sleeping in my car, discarded by the very child who had changed the course of my life. The irony wasn't lost on me. I sat in that coffee shop for hours, reading everything I could find about Sullivan Maritime and Jack Sullivan. The company had started small, a single cargo ship that Jack had somehow acquired in his 30s. Over the decades, it had grown into a respectable cruise line, not as large as the major players, but known for exceptional service and unique itineraries. Jack himself was something of a local business celebrity. Widowed 10 years ago, no children, active in community charities. There were photos of him at various events, always in his captain's uniform, silver hair catching the light, that same smile that had once made my 22-year-old heart race. By the time I left the coffee shop, I had a plan. It was risky. perhaps even foolish, but it was better than spending another night in my car. I drove to a budget motel near the harbor, used some of my precious savings to book a room for 2 nights, and took the first real shower I'd had in days. Looking at myself in the foggy mirror afterward, I hardly recognized the woman staring back at me. Gray streaked my once auburn hair, lines fanned from the corners of my eyes, and a weariness had settled into my features that hadn't been there before. But underneath it all, there was still a spark of the young woman who had once worked alongside Jack Sullivan, dreaming of a future filled with possibility. I just had to find her again. The next morning, I put on the best outfit I'd packed: black pants, a blue blouse that brought out my eyes, and a cardigan that hid the worst of the wrinkles. I styled my hair, applied light makeup, and practiced my smile in the mirror until it looked almost natural. Then I drove to the Sullivan Maritime Headquarters, a modern building overlooking the harbor with large windows that reflected the water. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, trying to gather my courage. What was I doing? Jack probably wouldn't even remember me, and if he did, why would he care about my problems? But I had nowhere else to go, and pride was a luxury I couldn't afford right now. I walked into the lobby, heart pounding so hard I was sure the receptionist could hear it. The young woman looked up with a practiced smile. "Welcome to Sullivan Maritime. How can I help you?" I took a deep breath. "I'd like to see Jack Sullivan, please." Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes told me everything I needed to know. People didn't just walk in and ask to see the CEO. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked politely. "No, but we're old friends. My name is Marin Calloway. We worked together at Coastal Maritime Supply back in the early 80s. I could see her calculating whether this was possible given my age versus her boss's. "Let me see if Mr. Sullivan is available. Please have a seat." I sat in one of the lobby chairs, watching as she made a call, speaking too quietly for me to hear. After a moment, she looked up at me with surprise. "Mr. Sullivan will see you. 18th floor. The elevator is to your right." My heart nearly stopped. I hadn't actually expected this to work. The elevator ride gave me just enough time to panic. What would I say? How would I explain showing up after 40 years, essentially homeless and desperate? But before I could formulate a plan, the doors opened directly into a spacious office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor, and there he was. Jack Sullivan stood behind a large desk, looking exactly like his photos, but somehow more real. The years had been kind to him. His hair had gone completely silver, and there were lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into ocean sunlight. But he was still tall and lean, with the same intensity in his blue eyes. "Marin Patterson," he said, then corrected himself. "No, it's Calloway now, isn't it? You remember me," I said, unable to keep the surprise from my voice. He smiled, that same smile that had once been the center of my world. I've never been good at forgetting the important things. The simple statement nearly broke me. When was the last time anyone had made me feel important? "Please, sit down," he said, gesturing to a comfortable chair across from his desk. "Can I get you something coffee water?" "Water would be nice," I said, suddenly aware of how dry my mouth had become. He poured 2 glasses from a carafe on a side table, handed one to me, and sat down not behind his desk, but in the chair next to mine. The gesture wasn't lost on me. He was choosing to meet me as an equal, not from a position of power. "So," he said after I'd taken a sip, "what brings you to my harbor, Marin Calloway?" I'd rehearsed various explanations in my head, ranging from partial truths to outright fabrications that might preserve my dignity. But looking into Jack's eyes, I found I couldn't lie. "My son and his wife threw me out," I said simply. "I've been living in my car for 3 days." I expected pity, perhaps even discomfort. Instead, Jack's expression darkened with genuine anger. "Tell me everything," he said. So I did. I told him about raising Dorian alone after his father left, about working multiple nursing jobs to support us, about moving in with them 2 years ago after retirement. I told him about Lennox's demand for cruise money, the slap, Dorian's betrayal, the 3 nights in my car. Jack listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as the story progressed. When I finished, he set down his water glass and leaned forward. "Let me get this straight," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "Your son and his wife demanded $50,000 from you for a luxury cruise, and when you refused, they threw you out of the house. It sounds worse when you say it like that. It sounds exactly as bad as it is. Marin, that's elder abuse." The words hit me like a physical blow. It's not, they financially exploited you and then made you homeless when you stopped complying. That's textbook elder abuse. Jack stood up and began pacing, his movement reminding me of how he used to walk along the harbor when working through a problem all those years ago. "How much money have you given them over the years?" I thought about it. The $20,000 for their wedding, help with the house down payment that was another $15,000, monthly rent, utilities, groceries, probably $60,000 over the past 2 years. "Nearly $100,000, Jack said quietly. "Jesus, Marin, I wanted to help. Dorian is my son, and you're his mother. That works both ways." Jack stopped pacing and looked at me. "What are you going to do now?" "I don't know. Find a cheap apartment somewhere, I guess. Maybe get a job, though at my age." I shrugged helplessly. Jack was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the harbor. Then he turned back to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "What if I told you there was another option?" "What do you mean?" He sat back down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Marin, I'm not just the CEO of this company. I built it from nothing, and I know talent when I see it." I almost laughed. "Jack, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I don't know anything about cruise ships or maritime business. But you know about people. You know about customer service. You were a nurse for 30 years. You know about caring for others under difficult circumstances." I stared at him, trying to understand where he was going with this. "We're expanding our guest services department," he continued. "We need someone who understands what it means to make people feel welcome, valued, appreciated. Someone who knows what it's like when the people who should care about you don't." "Are you offering me a job?" I asked incredulously. "I'm offering you an opportunity. Guest services manager for our flagship vessel, the Sea Star. It comes with a cabin on board during cruises and a company apartment here in Clearwater between voyages." The offer was so unexpected, so generous, that I couldn't process it at first. "Jack, I can't. I mean, what do I know about running a cruise ship department?" "More than you think, and you'd have the best teacher in the business." He smiled. "Me?" I felt something stirring in my chest, a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. Hope, maybe, or possibility. "Why?" I asked. "Why would you do this for me?" Jack was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. "Do you remember the last time we saw each other, the night before you left for Chicago?" I remembered. I'd gotten pregnant, and everything had changed. Jack had been offered his first position as a junior officer on a cargo ship. We'd both known we were being pulled in different directions, but we'd been too young to fight for what we had. "I should have asked you to stay that night," he said softly. "I should have found a way to make it work. Instead, I let you go, and it's been one of my biggest regrets." My breath caught. "Jack, I'm not saying this to pressure you or because I expect anything romantic to happen," he continued quickly. I'm saying it because I never stopped wondering what happened to you, Marin, and if I can give you a chance to start over, to build something meaningful after what they did to you, then maybe I can make up for some of that lost time. I sat with my water glass with trembling hands. Outside the windows, the harbor bustled with activity, people going about their lives, pursuing their dreams, building their futures. For so long, I'd felt like I was just existing, serving everyone else's dreams while my own withered away. I don't know anything about business opportunities, I said slowly. Then it's a good thing you'll have an excellent teacher. Jack smiled. What do you say? Marin ready to sail away from all this and start a new adventure. I looked around his elegant office, thought about my car in the parking lot with everything I owned crammed into 2 suitcases. Then I thought about Dorian and Lennox, probably already booking their cruise with the money they'd expected to extort from me. Maybe it was time to stop being the victim in my own story. Yes, I said, surprising myself with how certain I sounded. Yes, I think I am. I couldn't have known then how that simple yes would change everything, or that 6 weeks later, I would find myself standing on the deck of the Sea Star, watching as my son and daughter-in-law boarded the very ship where I was now second in command. But that part of my story was still to come. First, I had to learn how to navigate these new waters, how to rebuild myself from the broken woman sleeping in her car to someone who could stand on her own, someone who deserved respect. And I was about to discover that even at 62, it wasn't too late to become that woman. I'll continue with part 2 of your story, maintaining the same compelling narrative style and structural elements. The next 6 weeks passed like a whirlwind. Jack wasn't kidding when he said I'd have the best teacher in the business. Every morning, I'd arrive at the Sullivan Maritime offices, a gleaming building overlooking the harbor, and dive into learning everything about the cruise industry. It was overwhelming at first. Guest services protocols, safety regulations, staff management, vendor relationships, food and beverage operations. My head spun with information, but gradually, pieces started falling into place. You're a natural at this, Jack said one afternoon as we reviewed guest satisfaction surveys from the previous quarter. We were in his office, papers spread across a conference table that probably cost more than I used to make in a year. I'm just applying common sense, I replied, though I felt a flush of pride at his words. People want to feel valued. They want their problems solved quickly and their good times enhanced. It's not rocket science. You'd be surprised how many people in this industry forget that, Jack said with a smile. They get caught up in profit margins and efficiency metrics and forget that we're in the business of making memories. I'd been staying in a company apartment near the offices, a beautiful one-bedroom with a view of the water. It was temporary, Jack assured me, just until I decided where I wanted to live permanently. The freedom to make that choice still felt surreal. One evening after a particularly long training session, Jack invited me to dinner at a small Italian restaurant near the harbor. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the water as we sat at a table by the window. I have a proposition for you, he said after we'd ordered. And I want you to know you can say no without any impact on your position. My heart skipped a beat. What kind of proposition? Sullivan Maritime is growing. We're adding 2 new ships next year, and I need someone I trust to oversee guest services across the entire fleet. I stared at him. Jack, I've barely learned how to manage one department on one ship, and you've done it brilliantly. The crew respects you. Guest satisfaction scores are up, and you've already implemented 3 new programs that have increased onboard spending. That was just common sense. That was business acumen. He interrupted gently. You have instincts for this, Marin. You understand what makes people feel special. I took a sip of wine, considering his words. What exactly are you proposing? I want you to become our VP of Guest Services. The position comes with a significant salary increase, a more permanent housing arrangement, and, he hesitated briefly, a small ownership stake in the company. I nearly choked on my wine. Ownership, Jack. That's crazy. I've been here 6 weeks. And in those 6 weeks, you've proven your value. But more importantly, you've reminded me what this company was supposed to be about in the first place, creating exceptional experiences, not just running ships. He reached across the table and took my hand. The gesture was so natural, so comfortable. It made my heart ache for all the years we'd lost. There's another aspect to this, he continued. The stake would require an investment from you, $50,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. 50,000, the exact amount Lennox and Dorian had demanded for their cruise. That's most of my savings, I said quietly. I know, and if you don't want to risk it, I completely understand. The job offer stands regardless. I looked at our joined hands, then up at Jack's face. The sincerity in his eyes was unmistakable. Why are you really doing this? Jack, is it guilt over what happened 40 years ago? Pity for the homeless old woman who showed up in your office? His expression softened. Do you remember what you said to me the day we met at Coastal Maritime? I dropped an entire box of inventory sheets, and you helped me pick them up. I shook my head. The memory was too distant. You said, sometimes the biggest disasters lead to the best opportunities. And you were right. He squeezed my hand. This isn't about guilt or pity. Marin, it's about recognizing an opportunity when I see one. For both of us. A warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the wine. For the first time in decades, someone was seeing me not as a mother, not as a nurse, not as a convenient source of money, but as a woman with value and potential. I'd need time to think about it, I said. Of course. Take all the time you need. But even as I said the words, I knew what my answer would be. The money I'd been saving, the money Dorian and Lennox had tried to take, had been meant for security, for a future where I wouldn't be a burden to anyone. What better security could there be than investing in myself, in a future I was building with my own hands? 3 days later, I signed the papers that made me a 25% owner of Sullivan Maritime, with full authority over guest services operations. My investment was the $50,000 I'd refused to give Lennox and Dorian, money that was now working for me instead of funding someone else's luxury. Are you sure about this? I'd asked Jack as we sat in the lawyer's office. The biggest risk I ever took was letting you walk away 40 years ago, he'd replied. I'm not making that mistake twice. The romantic tension between us was impossible to ignore, but we were both taking things slowly. We'd have dinner together most evenings, sometimes in nice restaurants, sometimes just takeout in his apartment. We'd talk for hours about the past, about the business, about everything except what was growing between us. I was different now. I could feel it in the way I carried myself, in the confidence that crept into my voice during business meetings. For the first time in decades, I wasn't apologizing for taking up space. I wasn't grateful for scraps of attention. I was contributing something valuable, and people respected me for it. The transformation wasn't just internal. Jack had insisted I update my wardrobe for my new role, and shopping for business attire had been a revelation. I'd spent so many years buying whatever was cheapest, whatever would last longest, that I'd forgotten what it felt like to choose clothes that actually flattered me. Now I had tailored blazers, elegant dresses, shoes that made me feel powerful instead of practical. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a businesswoman, not a discarded mother living on charity. My phone had been eerily quiet since I'd left Dorian's house. No calls, no texts, no attempts to check on my welfare. The silence spoke volumes about how they really felt about me. I was out of sight and out of mind, exactly as they'd wanted, but I knew that wouldn't last forever. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon as I was reviewing staffing schedules for our Caribbean fleet. Dorian's name appeared on my phone, and I stared at it for a long moment before answering. "Hello, Dorian." "Mom." His voice sounded strained. "Where the hell are you? I've been trying to find you for weeks." I smiled at the lie. My phone showed no missed calls, no text messages. "I'm exactly where you told me to be, living my own life." "Look, about that night, Lennox feels bad about how things went down. We both do. Why don't you come home and we can talk about this like adults?" I almost laughed. "Come home. You made it very clear that I don't have a home with you." "Don't be dramatic, Mom. You know we didn't mean it like that. We were just stressed about money and you decided your stress was my responsibility to fix." I kept my voice level. "Professional? What do you need, Dorian?" There was a pause. Look, we're having some cash flow problems." "What kind of problems?" Another pause. "Lennox made an investment that didn't pan out like we expected." "What investment?" "She took some money from our savings to invest in her friend's startup. It was supposed to be a sure thing, but the company went under last month." I closed my eyes. "How much money?" "Most of it," he admitted quietly. "About 40,000, and now we can't make the mortgage payment. And the cruise line wants payment for the booking," I added, the pieces falling into place. "How did you know about that?" I ignored his question. "So that's why you called. Not because you missed me. Not because you regretted how you treated me. You needed money again." "Mom, please, we're family. I know we screwed up, but we're desperate here. The bank is talking about foreclosure, and if we can't pay for this cruise, Lennox is going to leave me. She says she can't be married to a financial failure." The old Marin would have felt guilty. The old Marin would have rushed to fix their problems, would have sacrificed her own security to bail them out once again. But I wasn't the old Marin anymore. "Dorian, I want you to listen to me very carefully," I said. "I am not going to give you any money, not for your mortgage, not for your cruise, not for anything." "Mom, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly. You and Lennox spent your savings on a risky investment without consulting anyone. You made poor financial decisions, and now you want me to face the consequences." "But you have the money. I know you do." "How I spend my money is no longer your concern." I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end of the line. "You made that very clear when you threw me out of your house." "We didn't throw you out. We just asked you to contribute more to the household. You demanded $50,000 and then assaulted me when I refused. Let's not rewrite history, Dorian." Silence stretched between us. Finally, he spoke again, his voice different now, harder. "Fine, but don't come crying to us when you're old and sick and need someone to take care of you, because after this, you're on your own." The threat might have worked on the old Marin, but the new me just smiled. "I'm already on my own, Dorian, and I'm doing just fine." I hung up before he could respond. That evening, I told Jack about Dorian's call over dinner, and he'd listened with a grim expression. "How are you feeling about it?" he asked as we shared a bottle of wine. "Relieved, actually," I said, surprising myself with the honesty. For years, I kept waiting for him to appreciate what I was doing for him. I kept thinking that if I just gave enough, sacrificed enough, he'd finally see me as more than just a source of money. And now I know that was never going to happen. He doesn't see me as his mother. He sees me as his backup plan. Jack reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm proud of you." The simple words meant more to me than any grand gesture. When was the last time someone had been proud of me? When was the last time someone had seen my strength instead of just my usefulness? There's something else, Jack said, his thumb tracing patterns on my knuckles. I got a call today from our booking department. Someone made a reservation on the Sea Star for next month's Caribbean cruise. A Mr. and Mrs. Dorian Calloway. My heart stopped. They booked the cruise even without my money. Apparently, they found the money somewhere. Credit cards, probably. I stared at him, processing this information. They're going to be on your ship. On our ship, he corrected gently. The question is, what do you want to do about it? I thought about it for a long moment. Dorian and Lennox would board that ship expecting a luxury vacation, probably paid for with borrowed money. They had no realistic way to repay. They'd strut around the decks, take selfies by the pool, complain about the service if their towels weren't fluffy enough, and they'd have no idea that the woman they'd discarded, the mother they'd used and thrown away, was now part owner of the very company providing their vacation. I want to be there, I said finally. Not to cause trouble, not to confront them. I just want to see who I really was to them, now that I know who I really am to myself. Jack nodded slowly. The Sea Star is launching a new guest services program next month. It would be the perfect opportunity for the new VP of Guest Services to be on board observing operations firsthand. VP of Guest Services. I raised an eyebrow. Effective immediately, Jack said with a smile. That is, if you're interested in the position. I looked around the restaurant at the other diners enjoying their evening, at the harbor lights twinkling through the windows. 6 weeks ago, I'd been sleeping in my car, discarded and alone. Now I was a business owner, a vice president, a woman with choices and power and a future. I'm very interested, I said. Jack lifted his wine glass. To new beginnings. To new beginnings, I agreed, clinking my glass against his. But as we drank, I was already thinking about the cruise, about Dorian and Lennox stepping onto our ship, still believing I was the weak, desperate woman they'd pushed around. They had no idea what they were walking into, and I intended to keep it that way, at least for a while. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to be the victim of someone else's story. I was going to be the author of my own. The morning of embarkation, I stood on the bridge of the Sea Star, watching passengers stream up the gangways. The organized chaos of cruise ship boarding was something I'd learned to appreciate over the past month. 1,500 people, all excited for their vacation, all expecting everything to go perfectly. I'd been living aboard the ship for 2 weeks now, learning every detail of operations from the inside. My cabin was on the same deck as Jack's, connected by a private corridor that we hadn't discussed, but both appreciated. Our relationship had deepened naturally during these weeks at sea, like we were picking up a conversation that had been interrupted 40 years ago. There, Jack said, pointing to a couple making their way up gangway B. Your son and daughter-in-law. My stomach clenched as I spotted Dorian and Lennox. Even from this distance, I could see Lennox's designer luggage, her carefully styled hair, the way she gestured imperiously at the porters handling their bags. Dorian walked behind her, looking older than his 37 years, shoulders slumped with what I now recognized as the posture of a man constantly trying to please someone who couldn't be pleased. They look exactly like I expected, Jack murmured. I'd shown him photos from my phone, the few family pictures I still had. He'd studied them with the intensity of a military strategist, which wasn't far from the truth. We'd planned this day carefully. Remember, he said, turning to me, you're Marin Sullivan now, VP of Guest Services. As far as anyone knows, you're conducting routine observations of embarkation procedures. Marin Sullivan. I'd started using the name a week ago after Jack proposed it. For business purposes, he'd said, though we both knew it meant more than that. The name felt like armor, protecting the new woman I'd become from the old wounds the old Marin carried. I made my way down to the main deck, wearing my crisp navy blazer with the Sullivan Maritime logo, my staff badge clearly visible. I positioned myself near the guest services desk, ostensibly reviewing check-in procedures, but really waiting for the moment I'd been both dreading and anticipating for weeks. It took an hour before I saw them. Lennox came first, of course, striding through the atrium like she owned the place. She wore a white sundress that probably cost more than I used to make in a month, and her new diamond bracelet caught the light from the crystal chandelier overhead. Dorian followed, looking around with the wide-eyed expression of someone who'd never been on a cruise ship before. Despite everything, I felt a pang of maternal affection. He'd always had that same expression as a child when we'd go somewhere special, the zoo, the county fair, anywhere his father had never taken him. They approached the guest services desk with a complaint already forming on Lennox's lips. "Excuse me," she said to Maria, our head guest services representative, "but there seems to be some mistake with our cabin assignment. We booked a balcony suite, but we're being placed in some tiny interior room." Maria checked her computer with the practiced patience of someone who dealt with entitled passengers all day. "I show you in cabin 4127, which is indeed an interior cabin that matches your booking confirmation." "That's impossible," Lennox snapped. "I specifically requested a balcony suite." "I understand your frustration, ma'am. Let me see what upgrades might be available." Maria's fingers flew over her keyboard. "I do have some balcony cabins available, but there would be an upgrade fee of $800 per night. For a 7-night cruise, that would be $5,600. "We'll take it," Lennox said immediately. Dorian interrupted, his voice tight. "We can't afford that." Lennox whipped around to glare at him. "Don't embarrass me, Dorian." "Lennox, we've already maxed out the credit cards just to pay for this trip. We can't." "Then figure it out," she hissed, low enough that she thought only he could hear, but I was standing close enough to catch every word. "I am not spending my anniversary cruise in some closet without a window." This was my chance. I stepped forward, my professional smile in place. "Excuse me," I couldn't help overhearing. "Is there a problem I can help with?" Maria looked relieved to see me. "Ms. Sullivan, these guests are hoping to upgrade their cabin." Lennox turned to me, and for a moment, I thought she might recognize me, but her eyes passed over me without a flicker of recognition. To her, I was just another service employee. "Finally, someone who might actually be helpful," Lennox said with exaggerated relief. "This young woman seems to think we can't afford a simple cabin upgrade." I looked at her steadily. This woman who had slapped me, thrown me out of my home, tried to steal my life savings. She was looking at me expectantly, waiting for me to solve her problem, just like she'd always expected me to solve her problems. "I'm Marin Sullivan, Vice President of Guest Services," I said, extending my hand. "And you are Lennox Calloway," she said, shaking my hand with the limp grip of someone who considered handshakes beneath her. "And this is my husband, Dorian. We're celebrating our anniversary, and we really need a cabin with a balcony." "Of course," I said smoothly. "Let me see what I can do for you." I moved behind the desk and pretended to review their booking on the computer. Dorian stood slightly behind Lennox, and when our eyes met, I saw a flicker of something that might have been recognition, but it passed so quickly I couldn't be sure. "I see the challenge," I said after a moment. "Your original booking was made quite recently, so most of our premium cabins are already occupied." "Recently?" Lennox's voice rose. "We booked this months ago." I tilted my head, looking at the screen. "According to our records, This reservation was made 6 weeks ago and paid for with a credit card that was declined twice before the payment went through. Dorian's face flushed red. There was a processing error with our bank. Of course, I said pleasantly. These things happen. I could feel the power dynamic in this conversation, and it was intoxicating. For the first time in my relationship with these people, I held all the cards. They needed something from me, and I could choose whether or not to give it to them. I do have one option, I said finally. There's a balcony suite that just became available due to a last-minute cancellation. The upgrade fee would be waived as an anniversary gift from Sullivan Maritime. Lennox's eyes lit up. Really, that's wonderful. There is one small condition, I continued. The suite comes with dedicated concierge service, which means you'll be working directly with me throughout your cruise to ensure everything meets our highest standards. That sounds perfect, Lennox gushed. We appreciate excellent service. I smiled. Excellent. Maria will get you sorted with your new cabin keys. The suite is on deck 12, and I believe you'll find it more than adequate for your anniversary celebration. As Maria processed the cabin change, Lennox leaned closer to me. Between you and me, she said in a conspiratorial whisper, it's so refreshing to deal with competent management instead of these entry-level employees who don't understand customer service. I maintained my professional smile. I completely understand. Good service is all about recognizing what people truly deserve. 20 minutes later, I watched them walk toward the elevators, Lennox practically floating with satisfaction at having gotten her way. Dorian looked back once, and again I caught that flicker of something in his expression, but he said nothing, just followed his wife like he'd been doing for years. I made my way back to the bridge where Jack was waiting with a knowing smile. How did it go? He asked. They have no idea who I am, I said, feeling a complex mix of emotions, relief, satisfaction, but also a deep sadness that my own son hadn't recognized his mother. Though I think Dorian might have had a moment of déjà vu. Are you okay? Jack's concern was genuine. I thought about it. I think so. It's strange seeing them like this. They're exactly who I always knew they were, but somehow it feels different when you're not depending on them for anything. Jack nodded. Power changes perspective. They're in the sunrise suite now, I said, the one with the cameras. We'd chosen that suite specifically. As part of our guest services training program, several cabins were equipped with discrete cameras to monitor housekeeping standards and guest satisfaction. Everything was completely legal and disclosed in the fine print of the cruise agreement, though most guests never bothered to read it. And they have dedicated concierge service, I added with a small smile. With me as their concierge? Jack's eyes twinkled. They're going to get exactly the level of service they deserve. The ship's horn sounded, signaling our departure. I watched the dock crew prepare to cast off the lines that kept us tethered to shore. Soon we'd be at sea, a floating city with 500 passengers and 600 crew members, all under Jack's command. And somewhere below us, in their upgraded suite, Dorian and Lennox were probably already ordering room service and planning their evening entertainment, blissfully unaware that the woman they'd discarded was now in control of every aspect of their vacation experience. The old Marin would have felt guilty about the deception. The old Marin would have revealed herself immediately, would have tried to reconcile, would have bent over backwards to make them happy. But I wasn't the old Marin anymore. I was Marin Sullivan, VP of Guest Services, part owner of this ship and this company, partner to a man who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. Tomorrow night was the welcome aboard show where Jack traditionally introduced key staff members to the passengers. It was a chance for everyone to meet the people who would be taking care of them during their cruise. I was very much looking forward to that introduction. "Penny for your thoughts," Jack said, moving to stand beside me at the bridge windows. "I'm thinking about tomorrow night," I said, "about the moment when they realize who I really am. And how does that make you feel?" I considered the question seriously. "Free," I said finally. "For the first time in my life, completely free." The Sea Star pulled away from the dock, carrying us all toward whatever waited in the open ocean. But I was no longer afraid of uncertainty. I'd learned that sometimes the unknown was exactly where you needed to be. Behind us, the harbor grew smaller and smaller until it was just a memory on the horizon. Ahead of us lay 7 days at sea. 7 days where Dorian and Lennox would slowly discover that their actions had consequences they'd never imagined. I wasn't planning revenge. I was simply planning to let them experience the same reality I'd been living in for years. A world where you had to earn respect rather than demand it. Where your worth was measured by your character rather than your connections. It was going to be an interesting cruise. I'll write the final part of your story, bringing everything to a satisfying conclusion with the remaining climactic moments and resolution. The first 3 days of the cruise passed like a carefully choreographed dance as their dedicated concierge. I shadowed Dorian and Lennox's every move while maintaining my professional distance. They treated me exactly as I'd expected as hired help who existed solely to fulfill their demands. "Marin," Lennox would say, snapping her fingers when she wanted my attention, "the towels in our bathroom aren't fluffy enough. Fix it." "Of course, Mrs. Calloway," I'd reply with perfect politeness. "I'll have housekeeping address that immediately." Dorian barely acknowledged my presence, which shouldn't have surprised me but still stung. This was the child I'd raised alone. The boy I'd worked 3 jobs to support, and he looked through me like I was invisible. Through the discreet monitoring system, Jack and I observed their private moments. The fights were constant and brutal. Lennox berated Dorian for everything: his clothes, his conversation, his inability to provide the lifestyle she felt she deserved. "I can't believe I married such a loser," she said on the second night, her voice sharp with contempt as they dressed for dinner. "Your mother was right about one thing. You're a disappointment." Dorian flinched at the words. "Lennox, please, we're supposed to be celebrating our anniversary." "Celebrating what? 5 years of mediocrity, 5 years of pretending you're something you're not." She turned away from the mirror where she'd been applying lipstick. "At least when your mother was bankrolling us, we could maintain some dignity." "She'll come around," Dorian said weakly. "She always does." "No, she won't. She's gotten selfish in her old age. Typical." Lennox picked up her purse. "Well, at least this cruise is paid for. After this, we're going to have to make some serious changes." I watched this exchange from the security office, Jack beside me. He squeezed my shoulder gently. "Still think you made the wrong choice?" he asked. I shook my head. The woman on that screen wasn't someone I'd ever truly known. I'd seen glimpses of her cruelty, but I'd always made excuses, always blamed stress or circumstances. Now I was seeing her true nature, and it was uglier than I'd imagined. The third day brought the incident that would change everything. I was in the dining room observing lunch service when I heard raised voices from across the room. Lennox was standing at her table, gesticulating angrily at one of our waitstaff, a young woman named Carmen, who was working her first cruise contract. "This is completely unacceptable," Lennox's voice carried across the dining room, causing other passengers to turn and stare. "I ordered my salad with dressing on the side, and you brought it pre-dressed. Do you not understand English, Carmen, whose English was actually excellent but carried a slight accent from her native Philippines? Apologized profusely. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I can get you a new salad right away. No, that's not good enough, Lennox snapped. I want to speak to your manager. This kind of incompetence is exactly why people like you shouldn't be working in hospitality. People like you? The phrase hit me like a physical blow. I'd heard that tone before, directed at me countless times, but hearing it aimed at Carmen, a hard-working young woman sending money home to support her family, filled me with rage. Dorian sat silently at the table, avoiding eye contact with anyone, including his wife. He was embarrassed by her behavior, but too weak to stop it. I walked over to their table, my professional smile firmly in place despite the fury burning in my chest. Is there a problem here? I asked pleasantly. Lennox whirled around, relief flooding her face when she saw me. Marin, thank God. This waitress completely messed up my order and then had the audacity to argue with me about it. I looked at Carmen, who was close to tears, then back at Lennox. I'm sure it was just a simple misunderstanding. These things happen. No, they don't happen when staff are properly trained. Lennox shot back. I want her fired. The dining room had gone quiet around us. Other passengers were watching the scene unfold, some with disapproval at Lennox's behavior, others with the uncomfortable fascination people have for public humiliation. Mrs. Calloway, I said, my voice still perfectly professional. I understand you're upset. Why don't we step outside and discuss this privately? No, I want this resolved right here, right now. This girl doesn't deserve to work on this ship. Carmen looked at me with pleading eyes. I knew her story. She was 23, supporting her parents and two younger siblings back home. This job was everything to her. Actually, I said, my voice taking on a slight edge, Carmen is one of our finest staff members. She's been recognized for excellence in guest service multiple times. Lennox's eyes narrowed. Are you contradicting me? I'm providing accurate information about our staff. I smiled, but there was steel in it now. Perhaps the confusion arose from a miscommunication about your order. There was no miscommunication. She's incompetent, and you're clearly too inexperienced to recognize poor service when you see it. The insult hung in the air between us around the dining room. I could see other passengers shifting uncomfortably. This was the moment I'd been building toward for 3 days. The moment when Lennox's true nature would be on full display for everyone to see. I assure you, Mrs. Calloway, I have extensive experience in guest services, I said quietly. More than you might realize. Something in my tone must have penetrated her self-righteous fury because she paused, studying my face more carefully than she had since boarding. Don't I know you from somewhere? She asked slowly. Dorian looked up for the first time since the argument began. His eyes met mine, and I saw recognition dawn in them like a sunrise. His face went white. Mom, he whispered. The word dropped into the silent dining room like a stone into still water. Lennox spun around to stare at Dorian, then back at me, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Hello, Dorian, I said calmly. Hello, Lennox? Lennox's face cycled through a dozen emotions. Shock, confusion, anger, and finally humiliation as she realized that everyone in the dining room had heard Dorian call me Mom. You, she started, then stopped, her brain clearly struggling to process the situation. You're supposed to be homeless, destitute, begging us to take you back. I finished for her. I was, for about 4 days. Then I found something better. Dorian was staring at me like I was a ghost. How are you here? How are you on this ship? I work here, I said simply. Well, actually, I own part of it. The statement hit them like a physical blow. Lennox actually staggered backward, her hand reaching for the back of her chair for support. That's impossible, she breathed. Is it? I looked around the dining room at the passengers who were now openly staring, at Carmen who was watching with wide eyes. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption to your meal. Sometimes family dynamics can be complicated. I turned back to Lennox, who was still gaping at me like a fish out of water. As for your complaint about the service, I'll be sure to note in your file that you attempted to have one of our best staff members fired for bringing you exactly what you ordered. Carmen nodded, still looking confused but relieved that she wasn't in trouble. Now, I continued, looking at Dorian and Lennox, I believe you were enjoying your anniversary cruise. Please don't let me interrupt that. We'll have plenty of time to catch up later. I started to walk away, but Lennox's voice stopped me. Wait! Her voice was shrill with panic. You can't just, we need to talk. I turned back, my expression politely inquiring. About what? About everything. About what happened. About the misunderstanding. There was no misunderstanding. Lennox, you made your feelings about me very clear. I gestured around the elegant dining room. As you can see, I've moved on. Dorian finally found his voice. Mom, please. Can we go somewhere private and talk? For a moment, looking at my son's pale, desperate face, I felt the old impulse to comfort him, to make everything okay. But that impulse was weaker now, tempered by the knowledge of what he was really asking for. We'll have time to talk tomorrow night, I said. At the Welcome Aboard show, I'll be on stage with the other senior staff members. The full implications of that statement hit them both simultaneously. Lennox's face went ash gray as she realized that I wouldn't just be introduced as staff, I'd be introduced as part ownership. Oh God, Dorian whispered. What have we done? I looked at him for a long moment. This man who had thrown me out of his house, who had chosen his wife's cruelty over his mother's love, who had seen me as nothing more than a source of money. You got exactly what you wanted, I said quietly. A life without me in it. Then I walked away, leaving them sitting in their luxury dining room, surrounded by the whispers of other passengers who had witnessed their public humiliation. As I made my way back to the staff areas, I felt lighter than I had in years. The secret was out. The pretense was over. Tomorrow night, when Jack introduced me to the entire ship as his business partner and the woman he loved, Dorian and Lennox would understand the full scope of what they had lost. But more importantly, I would finally be free of the last chains that bound me to a family that had never truly valued me. The old Marin would have felt guilty about their embarrassment. The new Marin Sullivan felt only the sweet satisfaction of justice finally served. That evening, Jack and I had dinner in his private dining room. I told him about the confrontation in the restaurant, and he listened with a mixture of concern and pride. Are you ready for what happens next? He asked, refilling my wine glass. They're not going to just accept this, you know, especially Lennox. I know. I took a sip of wine, feeling strangely calm. But what can they do? They have no power over me anymore. Not financially, not emotionally. Jack reached across the table and took my hand. That's what worries me. People who are used to having power don't surrender it gracefully. His prediction proved accurate sooner than either of us expected. Just as we were finishing dessert, there was an urgent knock at the door. It was Maria from guest services, looking distressed. I'm so sorry to interrupt, Captain, Ms. Sullivan, but there's a situation with the Callaways. They're demanding to be put ashore at the next port. They say they refuse to stay on a ship where they're being held hostage for public humiliation. Jack and I exchanged glances. The next port isn't until tomorrow afternoon, he said. Tell them we'll arrange for transportation once we dock. I already did, sir, but Mrs. Callaway is threatening to contact maritime authorities and claim we're detaining them against their will. She says her father is a lawyer who specializes in cruise line lawsuits. I almost laughed. Lennox's father was a high school gym teacher. The lie was so typical of her creating fictional connections to intimidate people. I'll handle this, I said, standing up. Where are they now? In the Starlight Lounge, ma'am, making quite a scene. I turned to Jack. I think it's time for us to have that private conversation after all. Want me to come with you? He asked. I shook my head. This is something I need to do alone. The Starlight Lounge was one of the ship's most elegant spaces, with floor-to-ceiling windows that would normally frame a spectacular view of the night sea. But now, the view was obscured by a storm brewing inside. As I approached, I could hear Lennox's voice, raised in that particular pitch she used when she wanted to make sure everyone knew she was upset. This is absolutely unacceptable. Do you know who I am? Do you know who my father is? I entered quietly, staying at the back of the room for a moment to observe. Lennox was standing in the center of the lounge, gesticulating wildly at the lounge manager. Dorian sat nearby, looking miserable, his head in his hands. A small crowd of passengers had gathered, some openly filming the confrontation on their phones. Mrs. Calloway, I said, stepping forward. Perhaps we could continue this discussion somewhere more private. She whirled around, her face contorted with rage. This is all your fault. You set this up to humiliate us. I did nothing of the sort. You booked this cruise. I simply happen to work for the company that owns it. Work for? She scoffed. Please. You expect us to believe you suddenly own part of a cruise line? You were living in our house 2 months ago, begging us not to throw you out. I raised an eyebrow. That's not exactly how I remember it. But yes, I am now part owner of Sullivan Maritime. Life takes unexpected turns sometimes. This is ridiculous, Lennox hissed. Dorian, tell her this is just some elaborate lie to get back at us. Dorian raised his head, and the defeat in his eyes told me he already knew the truth. It's not a lie. Lennox, look around you. Look at her. My mother doesn't lie. Then it's a scam, Lennox insisted. She's conned her way into this position somehow. There's no way she could afford to buy into a company like this. With the $50,000 you demanded from me? I asked quietly. The money you called measly. That's exactly what I used to buy my steak. Lennox's mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. For once, she was speechless. Now, I continued, I understand you want to disembark at our next port. We'll be happy to arrange that, but the scene you're creating is disturbing our other guests. So I suggest you return to your cabin, and we can discuss the logistics privately. I'm not going anywhere with you, Lennox spat. You planned this whole thing to humiliate us. Actually, I had no idea you would be on this cruise until after you booked it. A strange coincidence. Wouldn't you say, almost like the universe has a sense of humor? Dorian stood up suddenly. Can we please just go somewhere and talk, the three of us? Something in his voice, a desperation I recognized from his childhood, made me nod. My office. 5 minutes. As I walked away, I heard Lennox hissing at Dorian. What are you doing? We can't talk to her. We need to get off this ship. And go where? Dorian's voice was uncharacteristically firm. We're in the middle of the ocean, Lennox, and in case you haven't noticed, my mother is now in charge. 5 minutes later, Dorian knocked on my office door. To my surprise, he was alone. Where's Lennox? I asked as he entered. Having a meltdown in our cabin. He closed the door behind him and stood awkwardly, looking around at the elegant office with its mahogany desk and leather chairs. This is really yours. It really is. I gestured for him to sit. Vice President of Guest Services. 25% ownership stake. He sat heavily, running his hands through his hair. I don't understand. Mom, how did this happen? How did you go from sleeping in your car to this? Life is full of unexpected second chances. Dorian, I was fortunate enough to recognize one when it appeared. The captain, he's your boss. Jack, he's my partner in business and I hesitated, then decided to be completely honest. In life, Dorian's eyes widened. You're dating the captain of the cruise line. I'm building a life with the man who saw my value when my own family couldn't. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with all the things we'd never said to each other. Dorian looked down at his hands. I deserve that, he said quietly. Yes, you did? I don't know what to say. Mom, I'm sorry seems so inadequate. It is. He looked up, surprised by my bluntness. What do you want me to say? What can I do to fix this? I studied my son's face, seeing for the first time the lost little boy behind the man's features, the child who had never quite gotten over his father's abandonment, the boy who had always sought approval from the wrong people. Why did you do it, Dorian? I asked softly. Why did you let her treat me that way? Why did you join in? He was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because I was afraid. Of what? Of being like Dad. Of being the kind of man who couldn't provide for his family. He looked up, his eyes wet with unshed tears. You worked so hard when I was growing up. 3 jobs sometimes. Always tired. Always worried about money. I swore I'd never put a woman I loved through that. So you married Lennox, I said, understanding dawning. Her family had money, connections. She made me feel like I could be someone important, and for a while, it worked. I got the promotion, the house, the lifestyle she wanted. He shook his head, but it was never enough. There was always something more we needed, something better we deserved. And I became the easy solution, I finished for him. The walking ATM who would bail you out whenever Lennox's expectations exceeded your means. I didn't see it that way at first, he admitted. I told myself we were giving you a home, taking care of you in your retirement. But then Lennox showed her true colors. He nodded miserably. By the time I realized what was happening, I was trapped. The house we couldn't afford, the cars, the vacations. We were drowning in debt, and Lennox kept spending like nothing was wrong. And you were too proud to admit it. Too ashamed, he corrected. How could I tell you that I'd failed so completely that all your sacrifices, all those years of hard work to give me opportunities, had led to this? I felt a complex mixture of emotions, anger still, yes, but also a surprising tenderness for this man who had once been my whole world. So when Lennox demanded the cruise money, I went along with it. I convinced myself you owed us, that it was only fair after all we'd done for you. He wiped his eyes. God, Mom, I don't even recognize myself anymore. I reached across the desk and took his hand the first time I'd touched my son in 2 months. I don't recognize you either, Dorian, but maybe that's not entirely your fault. He looked at me, confusion in his eyes. I've had a lot of time to think these past weeks. I continued. About the kind of mother I was, the kind of son I raised. And I realized something I taught you, that love means sacrifice, that you prove your worth by what you give up for others. That's not, it is. I wore my sacrifices like a badge of honor. Look how much I gave up for you. Dorian, look how hard I worked. I never meant to, but I placed a burden on you. The burden to make all those sacrifices worthwhile. Tears were flowing freely down his face now. I just wanted to make you proud. And I was proud. I am proud. Not of the man who threw his mother out for $50,000, but of the little boy who used to leave wildflowers on my pillow when I came home exhausted from a double shift, of the teenager who learned to cook so I wouldn't have to, of the young man who sat with me at the hospital when Grandma was dying. "I've made such a mess of everything," he whispered. "Yes, you have." I squeezed his hand. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" The Welcome Aboard show was scheduled for 8 p.m. in the main theater. By 7:30, the 1,500-seat venue was already filling with passengers excited for the evening's entertainment. From backstage, I could hear the buzz of conversation, the clink of champagne glasses, the anticipatory energy that always preceded these events. I stood in the wings wearing an elegant navy cocktail dress that Jack had helped me choose. Sophisticated, confident, beautiful. The woman in the mirror looked nothing like the broken, discarded mother who had slept in her car 2 months ago. She looked like someone who belonged on this stage, someone who had earned her place in the world. "You ready for this?" Jack asked, adjusting his dress uniform. As captain, he would open the show and introduce the key staff members, including me. "More ready than I've ever been for anything," I replied, and meant it. Through a gap in the curtain, I could see Dorian sitting alone in the third row. After our conversation that afternoon, he'd returned to his cabin to find Lennox packing their things. According to the cabin steward, they'd had a shouting match that could be heard 3 doors down. Lennox had demanded they leave at the next port. Dorian had refused. The argument had ended with Lennox storming out, declaring she was going to the spa to think about whether this marriage was worth saving. I felt a pang of guilt. I hadn't meant to come between them, despite everything. But then again, I hadn't created their problems. I just exposed what was already there. The lights dimmed, and Jack stepped onto the stage to thunderous applause. He was magnificent in his captain's uniform, commanding and confident as he welcomed the passengers aboard the Sea Star. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice carried easily across the theater, "welcome to what I promise will be an unforgettable cruise experience. Tonight, I want to introduce you to some of the exceptional people who make the magic happen on board our ship." He introduced the executive chef, the cruise director, the hotel manager, each receiving warm applause as they took their moment in the spotlight. I watched from the wings, my heart beating steadily, calmly. This was my moment, the culmination of everything I'd worked toward. "And now," Jack continued, his voice taking on a special warmth, "I want to introduce someone very special to our Sullivan Maritime family. Please welcome our Vice President of Guest Services and my business partner, Marin Sullivan." The applause that greeted me as I walked onto the stage was warm and genuine, but I wasn't looking at the broader audience. I was looking directly at Dorian, watching his face as the full reality of my transformation hit him. "Marin joined our company 2 months ago," Jack continued, his hand finding mine as I reached his side, "bringing decades of hospitality experience and a passion for ensuring every guest feels valued and appreciated. She's also," he paused, squeezing my hand, "the woman I'm going to marry." The last statement sent a ripple of surprise and delight through the audience. Passengers loved romance, and the idea of the captain finding love with his business partner was exactly the kind of story they'd remember long after the cruise ended. But in the third row, Dorian looked like he might be sick. Jack leaned down and kissed me gently, a sweet public declaration of his love and commitment. The audience erupted in enthusiastic applause and cheers. "We're very excited about our future together," I said into the microphone, my voice clear and strong. "Both personally and professionally, Sullivan Maritime has become my home, and I'm committed to making sure every passenger experiences the same sense of belonging and appreciation that I found here." The irony of those words, spoken while looking directly at the son who had made me homeless, was not lost on me or on Dorian. He stared at me, his expression a complex mixture of shame, regret, and something that might have been pride. After the show, as passengers mingled in the theater lobby, Dorian made his way toward the stage. I watched him approach, noting how he moved hesitant and unsure, like a child approaching a parent after breaking a valuable vase. "Mom," he said when he reached me, his voice barely audible over the crowd noise. "Dorian," I acknowledged, keeping my tone neutral. "You're really marrying him?" he asked, glancing at Jack, who was chatting with a group of passengers nearby. "I am. He asked me yesterday." "That's fast." I smiled slightly. "When you reach my age, Dorian, you realize time is precious. When you find the right person, you don't waste it." He nodded, looking down at his shoes. "Lennox is leaving. At the next port. She says she can't stay on this ship another day." "I'm sorry to hear that. Are you?" He looked up, searching my face. "I'm sorry for any pain you're feeling," I clarified. "But no, I'm not sorry she's leaving. She's not good for you." "Dorian?" "She never was." "I know," he admitted quietly. "I've known for a while. I just didn't want to admit it." "What will you do now?" He shrugged helplessly. "I don't know. The house will have to go. Most of the debt is in my name. It's going to be rough." I studied my son, seeing him clearly perhaps for the first time, not as the baby I'd sacrificed everything for, not as the man who had betrayed me, but as a flawed human being trying to find his way, just like the rest of us. "It doesn't have to be," I said finally. Hope flickered in his eyes. "What do you mean?" "Sullivan Maritime is expanding. We're adding 2 new ships next year. We'll need someone to oversee the company's financial systems." His mouth fell open. "Mom, after everything, this isn't charity, Dorian, and it's not forgiveness, at least not yet. It's an opportunity to prove yourself, to show me and yourself what kind of man you really are." "Why would you do this for me?" "Because despite everything, you're still my son. And because I believe people deserve second chances." I paused, meeting his eyes directly. "But only one. There won't be a third." Tears welled in his eyes. "I don't deserve this." "No, you don't. But that's the thing about opportunities, Dorian. They rarely come to those who deserve them. They come to those who recognize them and are brave enough to seize them." Jack joined us then, placing a protective arm around my waist. "Everything all right here?" he asked, his tone friendly but with an unmistakable edge. "Yes," I said, leaning into his embrace. "Jack, I'd like you to meet my son, Dorian. Dorian, this is Jack Sullivan, my fiancé and the best man I've ever known." The 2 men shook hands, sizing each other up with the wariness of territorial animals. "I understand you're looking for a financial systems manager," Dorian said, his voice steadier than it had been moments before. Jack glanced at me, one eyebrow raised. I nodded slightly. "We are," he confirmed. "It's a demanding position. Long hours, high pressure, absolute integrity required. I have a strong financial background," Dorian said, "and I'm at a point in my life where I need to rebuild everything, really." "Including your relationship with your mother?" Jack asked bluntly. Dorian didn't flinch. "Especially that, if she'll let me." Jack studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "We'll talk tomorrow, 9 a.m. in my office. Don't be late." "I won't be. Thank you, sir." As Dorian walked away, Jack turned to me. "Are you sure about this?" "No," I admitted, "but I'm sure about giving him the chance to prove himself." Jack's eyes softened. "That's why I love you, Maren Calloway. Your heart is even more beautiful than your face." Later that night, As we stood on Jack's private balcony watching the moonlight on the water, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in years, maybe ever. "Penny for your thoughts," Jack said, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "I was just thinking about second chances," I said, leaning back against his chest. "How rare they are, how precious." Having regrets about Dorian. No, he made his choices. Now he has to live with the consequences. I turned in Jack's arms to face him. "But I'm grateful for my second chance. With you. With this company. With myself." He smiled, that same smile that had captivated me 40 years ago. "Second chances are overrated," he said, leaning down to kiss me. "What we have isn't a second chance. Marin, it's a first chance at something entirely new." And as his lips met mine, I knew he was right. This wasn't a do-over or a retry. This was something fresh and untainted by the past, a blank page waiting for us to write our story together. The next morning, I woke early and went to the bow of the ship to watch the sunrise. The sea stretched endlessly before us, a canvas of possibilities. As the first rays of light touched the water, turning it to molten gold, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. 2 months ago, I'd been sleeping in my car, discarded and alone, wondering how my life had come to this. Now I stood on the deck of a cruise ship I partly owned, engaged to a man who valued me for exactly who I was, with a future brighter than I'd ever imagined possible. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Dorian. "I'm at the port rail, watching the sunrise too, thinking about new beginnings. Thank you for the chance to earn back your trust. I won't waste it." I texted back a single word. "Good." It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. That would take time and proof of real change. But it was an opening, a possibility. The sea star sailed on, carrying me toward a future I'd chosen for myself, surrounded by people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. At 62, my real life was finally beginning. The waves stretched out before me, endless and beautiful, each one representing a new possibility, a new adventure. Beyond the horizon lay a lifetime of discovery, and I couldn't wait to see what came next. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here. Yes.